Good morning, all of you. Normally, I would say that it's my pleasure to moderate today's debate on behalf of our Brussels office of the Polish Institute of International Affairs. But it's not appropriate, I think, taking into account the dramatic situation in Ukraine, which has been facing for almost 1 month now, the Russian unprovoked and brutal aggression. If I could be glad, it's that peace managed to organize this timely debate together with the Ukrainian partner, Ukrainian think tank Liaison office in Brussels. In fact, this is the third public debate that we are organizing on this war, and for the last 3 weeks. And I'm convinced that Ukrainian voice should be as much articulated as possible. Here, I would like to thank Olena Carbou, Executive Director and co-founder of the Ukrainian think tank Liaison office I mentioned, and our today's panelists as well for her precious support to make this debate a reality. Thank you so much, Olena. I would also welcome our other honorable panelists, Daniel Szeligowski, who at PISM, he's our head of Eastern Europe program and our key expert on Ukraine. Then Stephen Blockmans, director of the Center for European Policy Studies, famous CEPS, and last but not least, Boris Iarochevitch, who is a senior advisor at the Eastern Europe and Central Asia Division at the European External Action Service. Good morning, all of you. And one more time, many thanks for accepting our invitation. So I also kindly welcome all gathered in person here participants, the same as our virtual attendees. And following our speakers' introduction remarks, I count on your engagement, questions and comments in our Q&A session. I will come back to this point with some technical instructions later. The context and the very focus of our today's discussion is clear. To put it short, Russia, under Vladimir Putin's leadership, by attacking Ukraine, has just ruined our peace in Europe. And since the our last week discussion we had, Russia has been accelerating in committing war crimes by massively bombing and killing civilians, like the dramatic case of Mariupol witnesses. All this has provoked already dislocation of almost 10 million Ukrainians, including emigration of over than 3.5 million, including 2 million to Poland. And the Western community, in particular EU, also via its member states, has provided Ukraine with comprehensive and fast support, especially in terms of weapon deliveries, financial support, and humanitarian assistance, and stepped up in severe sanctions against Russia. On top of that, yesterday, the EU foreign affairs ministers decided to raise the total of 1 billion euro in frame of the European Peace Facility fund to support Ukraine with arms supplies. But all these, and I think we can be clear on that, all these means have not ceased Russian aggression on this sovereign country. So should the EU do even more to support Ukraine? What Ukraine urgently needs mostly to counter this invasion? What additional options, like more sanctions, are still on the table to further help Ukraine to resist the aggression? Yesterday, we also heard Joseph Boris saying that there is no time now to establish sanctions on fossil fuels imported from Russia, because it will be too much cost for the EU. And most of all, what lessons we learned so far from our policy toward Russia in terms of plan for the next steps of sanctions, military support, financial support in face of possible use of the chemical weapons by Russia. These are central questions of our today's discussion. So I suggest, without any further delay, let's move to our dear panelists, and we are really looking forward to hearing in more detailed perspectives on this war from Ukrainian, Polish, and from the more broader EU level perspective, from an analyst and from a practitioner, EU diplomat. So Olena, let's kick off with you, with your welcome words, and then let's move to the very essence of our team. We had already lucky to have you with us last time, and 2 weeks ago, and we discussed when we discussed this aggression. What is your assessment of the current situation in Ukraine? What are present internal developments of this war? How do you assess the EU support and the West support to Ukraine? What could be, in your opinion, be done more? Please, the floor is yours, Olena.
Thank you, Łukasz. Thank you for such welcoming words. And on behalf of the Ukrainian think tank Liaison office in Brussels, I would like to welcome all speakers and all participants to this event. And I also would like to express our joy to continue cooperation with our Polish colleagues from Polish Institute of International Affairs. Yes, I was asked to provide a general assessment of the situation in Ukraine. I will picturize this with a few, but to my mind, defining definitions, if you want. Ukraine is fighting. Our spirit is high. This is our existential war, and the majority of our people do understand this. We are deeply shocked by the abyss of the moral fall of the Russian population. We are extremely thankful for the standing with Ukraine by the countries and the citizens of the free world. And we need and we hope for more of practical help of Europe and the free world to stop and to win this war. And now I would like to move to the issues which I do believe are of crucial importance, and answering the main question of this conference is how to support Ukraine in resisting the Russian invasion. And I would put how to help Ukraine to win this war, because this is of absolute importance. I will start with remaining about what kind of war we are dealing with and what kind of targets Putin may pursue by invading Ukraine. And first, it would be the direct attack on Ukraine, and with the purpose of restoration of the USSR or any kind of formulation he has in his head. And in this sense, it includes elimination of Ukrainians as a nation, which actually doesn't exist according to him. And in this sense, Ukraine is a direct target. But the second target of Putin and dimension of this war is actually destruction of the free world, because the Russian regime cannot coexist with the free world. And for Putin, it's important as much as destruction of Ukraine is attack on the free world, to show that the system is not working, is not capable to defend its values, to defend its citizens. And in this war, and in this sense, the free world is also the target. And this second point indicates that not only Ukraine is in danger, but the free world as such. And this Russian once again, the Russian war against Ukraine must be seen in this broader paradigm. And no one should really feel safe. Unfortunately, this understanding is still lacking in Europe. The war became an earthquake for the European continent, but the real understanding of danger, I'm afraid, is still to come. And the fact that the Russian army appeared to be so weak should not also relax us, because unfortunately this weakness is largely compensated with their readiness and willingness to do outrageous acts, violence acts, and committing crimes of war. Now, what should be done? And many of the things, all of these things are already doing. What I would emphasize is on the increasing the level of what has been done and should be continued to be done. First and foremost, we need to help Ukraine to win this war. And the weaponization of Ukraine should be increased and be fastened. Why it is so important? Because only military defeat of Russia in Ukraine, combined with the fact of sanctions, can provide the triggers to either regime falls from above or triggers the population to do something with this, because it will create both moral and socioeconomic triggers. And Ukraine, in this sense, must become as a castle for this war or for any possible circle of this work in future. And here I will repeat just demands of the Ukrainian side: heavy weapons, air defense system, aircrafts, and this no-fly zone over Ukraine, or means to be provided to Ukraine to to achieve this goal by the Ukrainians themselves. And again, here again, I would like to thank for this, for the assistance which has been provided so far. Without this, we know that we wouldn't be able to resist so fast, and so we wouldn't be able to go so far with resisting Russia, and these measures must be prolonged. Now, full economic sanctions. Yes, full economic sanctions must be increased, and we must achieve cancellation of all avenues for Russia to receive income from abroad. Because today's Russian economy, and I don't need to convince anyone here, is the basis for their military machine. And we need to switch it off before it takes more lives. And these sanctions and economic isolation must be off immediate as soon as possible, because the faster we go on this path, the more lives we will be able to save. And here, what is important to also to highlight that the sanctions and isolation and economic isolation of Russia must not be lifted until the final defeat of Russia and her removal from all occupied territories, wherever they are. And to my mind, only achievement of these two goals, military defeat and economic isolation, can bring the effect which we would like to stop the war which has been started by Russia, and to prevent it from expanding or from repetition. The third absolutely important element is the protection of Ukrainian civilians inside of Ukraine. The more pressure has to be put on Russia for this, and this is very good that we already started the recording of the crimes of war, and it became very clear that the Russian commander and those who were participating in this invasion and other wars must be brought to court. And international humanitarian organizations should restore their full work inside of the country to help civilians and not to be taken as hostages in the Russian military operations. So this, I would say, these are three crucial issues for the immediate or for now. Now, when we speak about the future, and we already speak about what kind of peace agreement could be, and provided that Ukraine wins this war. And to my mind, this peace agreement should be about full restoration of Ukrainian territory and sovereignty, including the lands which have been occupied in 2014, acceptance of military defeat by Russia, reparations, and security guarantees to Ukraine from existing and from real collective security structures like NATO. Only this, and by the way, what is also important, that Ukraine should not agree or shouldn't be pushed to agree to anything less than this. Because agreeing less than this, it would mean only one thing, that we would give Putin and Russia time and to reallocate resources, to mobilize resources, and to attack again, including not only on Ukraine. And we must be clear about this. And now, speaking about the future, and probably my colleagues will speak more about this, yes, the EU membership prospect for Ukraine, and I can confirm from the Ukrainian side that it has enormous moral meaning for Ukrainians, because this indeed provides the light in the end of the tunnel. and it gives hopes for all the suffering that it may end and the country will have its future. And we do hope for fast and hopefully simplified track of obtaining membership in the European Union, but at the same time, keeping a very close eye on the processes inside of Ukraine, including its adherence to democratic processes. And as has been already mentioned by many, creation kind of Marshall Plan for Ukraine, where a large part of the funds must come from frozen assets of Russia or from reparations of Russia. And so this would provide us the prospects to win this war, to restore our country, to rebuild all institutions, and to shine as this country deserves. Glory to Ukraine, glory to hero. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Olena, most of all for putting attention on the fact that, on the character of this war, that I think we should all the time repeat that this war has just started 1 month ago, but years ago, 8 years ago. And if you mentioned ceasefire agreements and negotiations, I have this impression that we've been talking about that for years and not just as a recent developments. Thank you so much for your intervention. Let's move now to the Polish perspective. Daniel, how you assess this unprecedented military, financial, and humanitarian use and its individual member states support for Ukraine? And another key question that I think our public is interested to hear is about Poland. What does Poland stand for in this war? What is its particular role in supporting Ukraine military, in humanitarian way, as an EU member state, NATO ally? Moreover, Poland has taken over its also chairmanship of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe for 2022. And Poland, as I said in the beginning, has received, since the beginning of the invasion, more than 2 million already refugees from Ukraine. And this is something also unprecedented for our country. And if you take into account that there is no refugee camps, I mean, in a regular sense, that's, we understand it. And Ukrainians refugees are just have been sheltered at homes or in special facilities provided by particular towns. It's quite remarkable and I think impressive and with unprecedented scale, I would say, for Poland. So please, the floor is yours, Anya.
Do I have like an hour for an answer for your questions?
Almost,
yeah, okay, great. So 3 points that I would like to make now. The general outlook, what the Russians really want in Ukraine. Please note that I'm going to be saying the Russians, because it's not about Putin, not about Russia, it's Russians. I've long have this painful conversations because I got a lot of relatives in Russia and Ukraine, and I spent a lot of time discussing these painful questions. It is unfortunately about Russians. The second point, what we do and what we should do, and the third point, the outlook for the future, and what we should not do, because that's the equally important. What the Russians really want in Ukraine now, that's kind of war of annihilation. Putin and his and Russia, the Kremlin, they've never recognized Ukraine as a sovereign country. It's always been about Ukraine. It is about Ukraine. It will be about Ukraine. It's never been about NATO. That was kind of Putin bluff, but they, I mean, really pretty much a lot of people bought this Russian bluff. It's always been about Ukraine because Putin, I mean, he always was telling us this pretty much straightforward, that they want kind of, I mean, he wants kind of new Soviet Union being rebuilt. And we remember when he said that the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest catastrophe of the 20th century. So this is about Ukraine, not about NATO. One thing, the plan A was, of course, to capture pretty quickly Kyiv and to have a sort of regime change in Ukraine. Of course, this didn't fly. And now we are looking for kind of alternative scenarios. Probably that's gonna be kind of this destroying the Ukrainian statehood as such, or trying to divide Ukraine into two. the front line probably would be along Dnieper River, or trying to capture some Ukrainian territory in the south and east, and then trying to establish this quasi People's Republic. We know now that there have been some attempt to establish Kherson People Republic, kind of similar to the Donetsk and Lugansk. But this is the thing, I mean, the Russians know that capturing Kyiv now will be quite problematic, and they know, or they are aware of the fact that they are going to spend some more time in Ukraine that at the very beginning they thought that's going to be. So they are trying to, or they have been now prepared for the occupation of the Ukrainian territory. Although at the very beginning, I think that was not the plan. That the plan was only to capture and then withdraw after the regime changes is done in Kyiv. But anyway, if we have the general outlook that probably now the Russians' point is to destroy the Ukrainian statehood as such, now we pretty much can say what we should do in terms of supporting Ukraine, because I've always, I often hear that the point is to have a ceasefire in Ukraine. I mean, yes, that's pretty much important to not to have Ukrainian civilians being killed by the Russians, but I don't really believe that's the point. The Russian military has to be unfortunately destroyed in Ukraine. The point is that we should not end up with sort of Minsk 3 in Ukraine, because we now remember what happened with Minsk 1 and Minsk 2, and Minsk 3 means that Russians have only a sort of time to regroup, to resupply their military, and then once again to resume the military operation and to go again, be it Kharkiv or Kyiv, it doesn't really matter. But 3 points in terms of what we should do now to help Ukraine. The first thing is, of course, military assistance, which means that we should supply Ukraine with any weapon they want us to supply. So, of course, we have to fight this war because we are into this war. I know that from, let's say, if we are in Portugal, it could be, I mean, we could say, yeah, that's a country, but that we don't really know much about. And it's pretty much far away. But for example, from Berlin to Ukraine, it's pretty much closer than let's say to Italy. So it is. I mean, the consequences are quite direct for the European Union and for NATO. I heard from Olena about the no-fly zone. I find it pretty much problematic now, because that's kind of very much offensive instrument rather than defensive one. So we should, if we are talking about the imposing of no-fly zone in Ukraine, then we have to attack the military targets the Russian military targets in Ukraine, in Belarus, and in Russia. And we are not going to that. That's quite problematic, not only from the political point of view, but also from the military point of view. So, but anyway, what we consider undoable now could be possible in 2 weeks or in 3 weeks, and could be necessary in 1 month, because the situation on the ground changes very quickly. And the political pressure on leaders in Western Europe, it could really increase in a couple of weeks and a couple of months. The wars, sometimes they take a lot of time. So we don't know whether the war is gonna end in a few weeks or in a few months, or maybe in 1 year. If there's gonna be a war of annihilation and a war of attrition, it could take a really lot of time, and we have to be prepared for that. So weapon supply is one thing for Ukraine. Two instruments or 2 things that are really important now is, of course, air defense, that we should supply Ukraine with air defense instruments. And the second one is how to help Ukraine to fight long-range missiles and long-range artillery strikes. If the Russians are going to fight, or if they are going to capture Kyiv, or they are going to attempt to capture Kyiv, that's the plan probably. What we have seen with Mariupol would be probably repeated along Kyiv. So that's the thing that we should help Ukrainians fight. Next thing is the economic assistance, because these are not only the Russians that bear the heavy cost of the war now, but the Ukrainians as well. The Ukrainians did really well at the moment. But let's say in a few weeks or in a few months, there will be some financial problems with Ukraine. Now, the Ukrainian Central Bank have, let's say, enough money for 2 or 3 months to doing really good business. But the problem is that they have been now cut off from the Azov Sea and from the Black Sea by the Russian military. And that's sort of, the Black Sea means that plus, I don't remember the exact time, but it doesn't really matter. Let's say half of Ukraine export comes through the Black Sea and the Azov Sea. So we now have a lot of problems with the Ukrainian international trade. This is something that we need to help Ukraine with, because there's going to be kind of change of the whole international trade routes via land, not via seas at the moment. What we have seen recently, that's quite problematic from my point of view, is that we've done a lot to support Ukraine in terms of financial assistance, but this is, I mean, these are the loans, and what's problematic that we supply Ukraine with financial loans, but they have to repay it in the military. I mean, in the moment when they fight a war. What we now need with Ukraine is that we have, I mean, we have to help Ukraine financially directly. I mean, not with the loans. And let's say that we need some kind of debt reliefs at the moment. We had, I can imagine of the situation that Ukraine has to repay all of the debt and all of the loans after the war, not now, because at the moment there will be kind of financial problems, and although we do not see it now, in a few weeks they will have to bear the costs of the war as well. And of course, given that the whole military situation it takes place in Ukraine, not in Russia, we have to really have this in mind. The third thing is humanitarian assistance and humanitarian support for Ukraine. We've done a lot. We've done a great job, but then again, please remember that Ukraine was always called this breadbasket of Europe, but now let's say 1/3 of the whole black soils and soils in Ukraine are out of operation because of the military, of the Russian military being in Ukraine. So then again, in a few weeks' time, where there's going to be summer in Ukraine, there will be a lot of problems with food supply. And that's what we should really have in mind. And we should be prepared for that. I mean, to supply Ukraine with really basic needs in terms of humanitarian assistance. Again, one of the most important points, we have to be prepared, or let's say we have to bear in mind that the most important focal point in terms of, let's say geographically now, is Polish-Ukrainian borderland, because if the Ukrainians are cut off from the border with Poland, probably we've done, I mean, we are out of the operation, because we could supply, of course, Ukraine during, let's say, along the Slovakian-Ukrainian or Romanian-Ukrainian border, but the most important point is now the Polish-Ukrainian borderland. That's where all these supplies are coming to Ukraine. Now we've sort of outlook for the future and the negotiations. I don't really see a room for compromise between Ukraine and Russia at the moment. My point is that this is only a general Russian bluff, that they are trying to convince the West that there is, let's say, that there is some potential for having an agreement between Ukraine and Russia. We saw these articles in the Financial Times and different Western media coming only from the Russian side, not from the Ukrainian side. That they've been negotiating something and there is progress, etc., but there is not. My general assessment, or my general, my pretty much private assessment, is that the Russians are bluffing us. I mean, they want us to believe that the agreement is pretty much close. Why? Because they want us to delay the weapons supply to Ukraine. I mean, there are many people saying, yeah, okay, if there is an agreement upcoming, let's not send weapons to Ukraine, because that could, let's say, complicate the whole thing, the whole negotiation situation. They want us to believe that this would complicate the whole thing. Why? They are only buying time. They're only buying time to regroup and then once again to resume the operation. That's the same thing that we saw with the Minsk agreement, the first and the second Minsk agreement. That's basically, so we have now a short, very short window of opportunity to supply everything the Ukrainians need. We've wasted 1 week already. I guess that's. I mean, I'm not gonna be offending now our American friends, but the President Biden announced 1 week ago the new package of weapons supplied to Ukraine 1 week past, and they didn't deliver it. Not yet, at least. I'm not aware of that. So we wasted 1 week. Probably will waste a couple of days, a couple of next days as well. That's what the Russians want, and at some point they really win. I mean, over this general situation. Sanctions. The last sentence. Yes.
You really believe that you will go for 1 hour? So
yeah. Okay. Sorry. So okay, one sentence on sanctions, because what's the purpose of the sanctions now? It's not about changing the general Russian behavior. The sanctions now are part of Ukrainian negotiation position. So we are now trying to increase the Ukrainian diplomatic leverage over Russia. That's the point of sanctions. It's up to them, it's up to the Ukrainians to decide on the terms of the potential agreements. We are not the ones to say to Ukrainians, you should do this, you should do that, you should, let's say, I don't know, the concessions on Crimea, on Donbass, etc. It's up to them, and the sanctions are only part of their own leverage against Russia. No lifting of the sanctions unless the Russians withdraw from the whole territory of Ukraine.
Very well. Thank you for this first introductory, very important elements. Well, before giving the floor to Stephen, I would like to make an announcement to our virtual attendees. So if you would like to make some question and put some comments, you can do it from now within the chat. So please go ahead if you have a question to a particular panelist or some more general question, go ahead. Stephen, let's turn to you now. So I would like to, most of all, ask you about your view on political messaging, mentioned already by Olena around Ukraine's EU's membership applications. What's your take on that? That's the first important question for you. And the second one, knowing your great expertise in European affairs, I would like to ask you, what is your assessment on how can we confront Putin's regime in short, immediate, in short, and mid-term, particularly regarding our dependency on Russian fossil fuels? I mentioned Boris' words, but of course I need to underline that many countries are reluctant to this type of sanction. It's very problematic, and maybe the most vocal was Hungary yesterday. That's the red line. So what to do with this, facing, as I mentioned, possible use of chemical weapons by Russia. So please go ahead. The floor is yours, Stephen. Thank you, Łukasz, and of course to PISM and the Ukraine think tank liaison office for the kind invitation to contribute to the debate. Indeed, I would like to take a slightly different angle to the central question of this morning's event. It goes by itself to say that that current operational priorities are, of course, to help Ukraine fight and survive, and to support, the huge and growing number of refugees arriving in EU member states. But other than that, there's more work to be done on the EU level. Colleagues have already focused a lot on the issues of more operational concern. So indeed, let me try and focus on complementary issues that we need to work on. On the one hand, you have the transatlantic unity in opposing this naked war of aggression that will require more work in the next weeks and months. We have the summit tree coming up, of course, not just in Brussels with the European Council and the NATO summit at the end of this week, but also on April 1st in a virtual meeting with Xi Jinping, with Charles Michel and Ursula von der Leyen. So a lot of political messaging there is indeed needed, especially to convince our Chinese partner and yet rival that European attitudes might harden if indeed China is seen to actively help Russia in circumventing EU sanctions. Of course, these punitive sanctions, the
delivery of arms and munitions, they've been adopted. Yesterday, the Foreign Affairs Council gave the green light to doubling the use of EU funds to 1 billion euro for arming Ukraine, and discussion about closing loopholes in the existing sanctions, as well as what you mentioned, the adoption of further sanctions hitting oil and gas imports from Russia, will, to my mind, get increasingly difficult for reasons that are well known. What the EU should focus on, to my mind, is really to shore up its strategic gas reserves. And that could be done not just in the ways that have been touted by ministers and also by the Energy Commissioner so far, but by creating a sort of European stability mechanism fund or company even, which is established by the EU, which purchases gas and redistributes it to countries in need. So I mean, there is a concrete proposal there that we've developed and which can be looked up on the website. But I would like to focus a little bit more on this political signaling effect on Ukraine's EU membership application. And so, as a matter of urgency, I think a stronger positive response to the application is needed. The European Council at Versailles is, of course, given a swift and strategic approach or response to embrace Ukraine as belonging to the European family, which is essentially a diplomatic formulation found to satisfy reluctant member states of going too fast. Effectively, though, what the heads of state and government have done is to play for time, just to resolve their internal disputes. I mean, the first cracks of divisions which have appeared between them, and put the ball in the court of the European Commission. And then we saw reports over the weekend that Commission President von der Leyen reportedly said to President Zelensky that the Commission would take several months to issue its opinion. Now, when the country is in a war of survival and is partly occupied by Russian forces, it goes without saying that the normal enlargement procedures should be cannot be applied and should be adapted, to my view. There's no legal impediment for the European Commission to depart from its established practice to, compile a 300-page questionnaire and to follow up in a long and arduous bureaucratic process for which the Ukrainian administration simply doesn't have the bandwidth at the moment. So, and I agree with those that say that the point of granting candidate status quickly is of paramount importance to signal the EU's fundamental support to a Ukraine which is whole and free, which will be whole and free, and thereby to give hope for a better future that can lie ahead. And I would advocate that due to the big investments made since 2014 by Ukraine in implementing the association agreement and the deep and comprehensive free trade arrangements that exist within it, whose chapters, by the way, are the same as for the existing enlargement process, Ukraine indeed already qualifies for candidate status as justified by objective facts. And at CEPS over the last couple of years, in projects which have been sponsored by the Swedish International Development Agency, more recently by the European Commission's own DG Trade, following their methodology, we've conducted detailed evidence-based analysis, which shows that at least until 4 weeks ago, in terms of approximating EU laws and norms, the 3 East European associated states may be ranked alongside the 4 Western Balkan states that have been granted candidate status, and well ahead of the other 2 Western Balkan states that have been qualified as potential candidates. So to my mind, Ukraine should be fully integrated in the existing enlargement procedures. The snag is, however, that these procedures and the methodology are themselves in need of thorough revision and upgrading. And the enlargement methodology as it exists continues to suffer from this binary in or out type of dialectic that has kept the Western Balkan countries in limbo for years. And the February 2020 revision of that methodology has not generated the momentum that had been expected from it. There is, I mean, I'm not advocating to replace it, especially not if the opening of accession talks with Albania and North Macedonia gotten stuck thanks to the lifting of the Bulgarian veto. But the procedure needs to be improved so as to generate the necessary buy-in of member states in support of reform in applicant countries and assisting the European Commission in doing its monitoring job in a much more evidence-based, quantified manner. And it is here that in cooperation with a Belgrade-based think tank EPC, CEPS has published late last year a proposal advocating a process of staged accession to the European Union, which foresees the introduction of clearly marked and conditioned steps towards membership, with larger benefits in terms of structural funding, in terms of inclusion of applicant countries' administrations, members of parliament, in the functioning of EU bodies and institutions, which was hitherto not foreseen in the process or only at a very late stage. This, we think, should afford both the political status and produce tangible rewards for reform, thus tying candidate countries into a more genuine pre-accession process, at the same time providing for regress procedures in case of backsliding on key indicators, as we've seen in Serbia, for example, thus alleviating fears among certain member state capitals of adding new veto players around the decision-making table of the Council. And what we've done is we've essentially sounded out government officials in Western Balkan countries. We've toured capitals of EU member states, most notably in Paris, both at the Élysée, at the Quai d'Orsay, in Berlin, at the Bundeskanzleramt, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, The Hague, Vienna, Stockholm, etc., where that proposal has been met with cautious optimism, in certain cases enthusiasm. And we think that this proposal deserves now more consideration by the EU institutions and member states like Poland, in the interests of both Ukraine, as well as the Western Balkan and the other Eastern European states that are either already tied into the process or that have applied for EU membership. And that should tie Ukraine, in particular in the process, which is guided by a firm prospect of EU membership. And for that, the Commission should issue its opinion fast and put the ball back in the court where it belongs, that of the member states. They need to have the political courage to see their commitments made at Versailles through, to grant candidate country status to Ukraine, as 11 countries of Central and Eastern Central Europe have already called for, of course. And that decision, of course, comes at no additional cost to the burden of Ukraine and member states that they're already carrying at the moment. And it underlines the commitment of the EU to the free choice of Ukraine and its citizens to determine the future course of their country. So that would be my answer to the question, what's needed. Of course, humanitarian support, provision of weapons and munitions, this has been described. I would add candidate country status immediately, certainly not later than the European Council summit in June. And then for the post-war situation, of course, a massive reconstruction and development program should be prepared, a return to the DCFTA agenda, and staged accession. But perhaps as a parting thought, and perhaps more uncomfortable to our Ukrainian friends, let me say this. We need to think about what will change in Ukraine as a result of the war in political, economic, and societal terms. And it may seem premature and far away from the immediate priorities as of now, but we have to bear in mind that already in 1943, 1944, so well before the end of World War II, both in the UK and in the US, serious work was being done on post-war scenarios. And of course, this would best concern more Russia itself, and what should happen in the post-Putin era. than a victorious Ukraine, one might argue, but still the shock, the huge shock and the trauma of war will have consequences on Ukraine and on its society. And the question is, of what kind? And this is where some of our work should also focus. So with that, thanks for the opportunity again, Łukasz and Olena.
Stephen, for your very interesting contribution. This stage accession mode process seems very interesting, and it's not only it's advocacy with evidence-based basis. So thank you for your input. Let's move to Boris. You have this also luxury to be able to react to all what was said until now. We are very interested in your lecture regarding the state of play of EU support for Ukraine and what can we expect more to come. Of course, one of the other key questions is also regarding to how to design this direct, short and long-term policy toward Russia. Please, Boris, the voice of practitioner. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you.
Yes,
it works, yes?
Yeah, it works.
Thank you very much. I think it's extremely interesting for me as well. And I would like to thank you and the Liaison office for organizing this event, also for providing us regularly with information on the situation on the ground. A lot has already been said. I would like to add that we stand fully with Ukraine. It has been made clear since the 24th of February, but even before. We signed an association agreement, which was already mentioned, and we know that Ukraine has chosen a European path many years ago. And the fact that last week or 2 weeks ago in Versailles, we have recognized the European aspirations of Ukraine, I think it's a big, big step that we should not underestimate. I've been dealing with a couple of Eastern Partnership summits, dealing with the final statement. And I remember that this point of European aspiration was also a very difficult one to be negotiated with our EU member states. So I think it's a big step that, of course, opened the way for the recognition of Ukraine as a candidate country in the future. I listened very carefully to what was said by Stephen, and so far there is no fast track to join the EU, but let's hope that we might be creative in that respect. I know that my colleagues in the European Commission are working very actively on this assessment, and indeed, what has been achieved under the association agreement and the deep and comprehensive free trade agreement is already a building block in this accession process. We already said that the EU support to Ukraine has been massive. I take the point that there are loans, of course, but there are also a lot of grants. There are also emergency packages by the EBRD. So we are mobilizing a number of IFIs, the European Investment Bank as well. We have achieved a lot of progress in some files which we would not have thought about before, like the connection of the electricity grid of Ukraine to the European grid. Sounds very technical, but it's a big step, which was not expected before years, and we achieved it in some weeks. You already mentioned this military support, the doubling of our contribution to the European Peace Facility from 500 to 1 billion euros. I also fully agree that the war started actually in 2014, and let's not forget that 14,000 people have been killed since 14 and until the end of February in eastern Ukraine. I would like also to remind that actually already in 2008 there was a war between Russia and Georgia, with also occupation of some of the Georgian territories. And we might fear that Republic of Moldova, but also Georgia might be next and might be also a target for Russia. You mentioned challenge to the European security. I think it's a challenge to the international order. We by a nuclear power, which is dramatic. And we do a lot also to reach third countries at the UN level, because it's not only a European issue, it's a worldwide issue. And it's a dramatic challenge to the UN Charter, to all the UN principles. And you know that we are putting tremendous efforts together with like-minded countries to isolate Russia as much as possible in international fora. There was a vote in the UN General Assembly on a resolution on the war, which was very broadly supported. We know we are supporting now a Ukraine-sponsored resolution on the humanitarian situation in the country. So we do a lot, and we have together with the United States, UK, a number of other partners, we have a list of international organizations where Russia should be isolated and where Russia is currently condemned, isolated, or simply expelled or excluded. Also there are a number of international positions where Russian candidates have applied that we are blocking now. We said a lot about sanctions. We have 4 packages by now adopted since the 24th of February. We have a 5th package in preparation, which has not been adopted yet, indeed, but we are ready to do more. And these sanctions are unprecedented. I think I've never seen such hard-hitting sanctions, which through will have a mid-term impact. I mean, it's not an immediate impact, but it's clear that the objective is to have Russia cease its military actions and withdraw all forces and military equipment from the entire territory of Ukraine. That is one of the preconditions to lift the sanctions. So most probably the sanctions will stay for long. We know that they have a very tough impact on the Russian economy, basically blocking, isolating Russia in terms of financial support, in terms of trade. And we know that we are withdrawing the most favored nation status from Russia, so depriving Russia from the benefits of the WTO membership. I guess the next step by Russia would be a withdrawal from the WTO. We'll see what the State Duma will decide. I would not agree that we are against Russians. It's true that part of the Russian population supports the operation or the war, but we must...
70%, there are polls.
Sorry?
More than 70%, there are polls.
2/3, but I think really 1/3, to my understanding, 1/3 is really behind. I think 1/3 is probably afraid to express its view, and 1/3 is really opposed to the war. I mean, but of course, there is a huge state propaganda. I mean, a real brainwashing on the state media, TV. It's incredible. And we know that access to independent, open information is almost closed now. All the international media have left. The latest is Euronews now will be closed. I think it was the last kind of international channel operating in Russia. It will be closed soon, or already closed. all the independent media, I mean, TV, Dost, Echa Moskwy, they've all been closed. Only Novaya Gazeta tries to survive. It's the last, I would say, independent newspaper, but it's extremely difficult. So we still try, and we will continue to try to reach Russian citizens, to explain our policy that our sanctions are there to stop the war, to stop the military actions. We will try and continue exchange programs in the field of education to try to work with youth. I think it's a wish of our member states to continue that because we cannot just cut all the links with any Russian. So I know it's extremely difficult, but we still believe in diplomacy. Our political masters, President Macron, Chancellor Scholz, are keeping contacts with Putin, and it's extremely difficult because to negotiate you need to be two, and we know that Russia has been of extremely bad faith, to say the least, lying. So it's more and more difficult, also in light of the crimes which are committed every day in Ukraine, but. Even if there is only a thin hope, I think that negotiations should be pursued between Ukraine and Russia. I think, and we know that there are third countries ready to help. Turkey, Israel are trying. I think the UN could do more, for instance, to have ceasefires, even local ceasefires. So we still believe that diplomacy could achieve something. About the future, extremely difficult to say, but I definitely agree that we will need to think about post-war scenarios vis-à-vis Ukraine, vis-à-vis Russia. For us, it's also extremely important to work with third countries which are affected by sanctions. We mentioned the food supply, food security. I mean, a number of countries will be affected about what's happening in Ukraine. We should avoid, of course, third countries circumventing sanctions. It applies to Central Asia, for instance, to China, and China is of course a big question mark these days, and a lot of efforts are put by like-minded, the US, by us to try to convince China to join at least the condemnation and to, if possible, to not to help Russia in any way. So I don't have answers today. I have a lot of question marks, and that's why for me it's extremely interesting also to listen about what was said and about the questions. We are also working on the Eastern Partnership, which is a concept very important to Poland and other EU member states, what to do with the Eastern partners. Belarus is already under sanctions. Armenia is in the hands of Russia. Azerbaijan is not clear. Georgia, Moldova, Ukraine are now on the European path. So does it still make sense to have an Eastern Partnership framework, or should we design something new? So a lot of questions we are working on. As I said, I mean, we will continue to fully stand with Ukraine. There are difficult questions about what to do next in terms of sanctions, and there are intense debate within the European Union. But we are ready to respond by further questions because we see no ending to the escalation on the ground. Unfortunately, it's on the Russian side, and the worst might still come. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Boris. Thank you very much. Before giving the floor to the larger public, we are very keen to hear your comments and questions. Just to react, because that was my fault. No, I asked you this question about the mid and long-term policy toward Russia. I think we all agreed on the direct needs, how to support Ukraine, in particular military. But I'm mostly convinced that there is an important support by Russian society to this war. I've been working on a civil society in Russia for 3 years as a researcher, and we can not only we don't have to count only on some polls that can be not so relevant, yeah, but we can't see anti-war demonstrations. There are some, and this is very brave people who demonstrate in Russia now against this war. But this is also a fact that we don't have this this huge mobilization of important relevant mobilization from Russian society against this. We can now state it. More and more war crimes that are happening in Ukraine, and we'll see what will happen next when Russia has been radicalized itself, not achieving direct military goals. There are many Russians that have left the country, dozens of thousands, maybe even more, and then that's also the question, which is one of our virtual attendees' question: how to communicate with the Russian society. So you mentioned it, that we would like to do it, we are aiming to do it, but how to do it now? The propaganda has worked for years, and I think it's proved to be quite successful, referring to my first point. But I will leave the floor to our public. So we have some questions from virtual attendees, but we need to take advantage of your presence here and your effort you made to come here. So please go ahead. Who would like to ask questions, make comment? Please, before doing that, please present yourself.
My name is Dmitry Shkurko, National News Agency of Ukraine. It's obviously that diplomacy should play its role in the conflict resolution. But right now we have a key question, what the negotiations should be held about. So what would be a topic? That's why I want to ask Olena. You mentioned absolutely rightly, and I agree that the only way for Ukraine to survive is to get to prevail, to get some kind of victory in that fight. But what is the definition for a victory for Ukrainians? This is an important question because it looks like even if we will stuck on the liberation of all occupied territories, including the Crimea, it would not solve the issue if Russia would not change. You see, it will postpone war for some time, but you know, the war will come back sooner or later. So that what is the definition of victory for yourself, and what kind of referenda and questions President Zelensky want to ask the Ukrainian people about the future negotiations with Russia? If you know the answer, of course, to that question. And for our European friends, we all know some kind of division inside EU on the position of, for example, energy. So that my question is pretty simple. I don't know how here in Europe, but there in Ukraine, we see all the sign of absolutely Nazi and fascist state appearing inside Russia. So that if you are going to continue the trade in energy field with Russia, what conditions of coexistence between the modern West and Putin's Russia still existing in this world? Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much indeed. What I suggest just to take one more question, and then I will leave you to respond.
Yes, thank you so much. I will be very quick. I'm Frédéric Moreau. I'm a lawyer here at the Bar of Brussels and a research associate at IRIS in Paris. My question is very simple. What should the Europeans do if tomorrow or in a week time, Mr. Putin used the chemicals weapons or a small tactical nuclear bomb? What should we do?
Thank you, Frédéric. Olena, let's start with you again, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Dmitro, for the questions. I would like to answer the following way. If Ukraine gets Crimea, it would mean the death of the Putin regime. It is clear as that. if we manage to fully restore our territorial integrity, it would mean the death of the Russian regime. Because for Putin, Crimea means him being in power. He loses Crimea, he loses power. That's it. That is why I insist on military win of Ukraine in this war, because it creates a moral trigger for elites, for the population, that he has lost. Putin did not bring what he has promised to these people. That's it. And that is why we need to insist. And coming to your second question on referendum, we know, right? We Ukrainians, we took the promise not criticizing publicly the authorities in times of war, and we keep our word. But it doesn't mean that we stopped monitoring the actions or intentions of the authorities. And this referendum in times of war, it's one of those intentions which we need to keep a very close eye on, and to make it very clear that now the Ukrainian authorities have full capacities in their hands to make decisions. And I already listed the conditions in which can be considered as the victory of Ukraine. And no referendum on successions or any other decisions in terms of giving any preferences to Russia can be held. And we must be very clear about this. And this is, by the way, this is our job of Ukrainians, to keep a very close eye on this and to alarm on any processes which we see may go against the interest of Ukraine. So thank you for the questions, and we will win.
Daniel, the floor is yours.
I would change the perspective a bit. So the question on what would be the Ukrainian victory is quite problematic for me. So I mean, our end goal should be to deny the Russians victory in Ukraine. If we deny the Russians to achieve the political goals in Ukraine, that's actually the Ukrainian win. So they cannot change the Ukrainian political system, and they cannot capture more Ukrainian territory. I mean, that's the basic thing. And if we deny the Russians victory in Ukraine, then we have the Ukrainian victory as well. Derived from that, we got the point on the negotiations. I think that the shuttle diplomacy with Moscow should immediately be stopped. I mean, there is a President Putin cherry picking different Western leaders and then playing one against the other. I'm not gonna talking, let's say, with the Polish president, because I can talk to the French one, yeah? Or to the Chancellor of Germany. It brought no results. We should be helping Ukraine, and it's up to President Putin, it's up to the Russians to call us. I mean, we have to, let's say, we have to create the situation in which these are the Russians that need to talk to us. That's why I'm saying, if we deny the Russians victory in Ukraine, then at some point they would have to create for themselves this kind of face-saving option. And Putin was given so many face-saving options, and he was never interested in that. And we are still looking for some face-saving options for him, and he's still not interested in that. We saw it in Mariupol, in Kharkiv, in Kiev. We're still thinking about, I mean, we've been more thinking about Putin and Russia than about the future of Ukraine. And about the future of Ukraine, I don't think we, at least some of us, will not like it, because there's gonna be a fortress Ukraine in the future. I see no other option. There's gonna be kind of Israeli military state in Ukraine, because even after the war, there will be, of course, the war trauma in Ukraine as well, but there were many voices even before the war, before 2014, saying that the Russians are there, Russia is there, Russia is here to stay, and they have to be prepared that this is a long-term threat to the Ukrainian existence, to the existence of the Ukrainian state as such, and they have to be prepared to fight this long-term threat. So now, after the war, we will have a really militarized state in Ukraine. I see no other option. That's called, we can call it Fortress Ukraine, no matter what, but I mean, that's be the end goal in Ukraine after the war. And some of us would not like it, I believe. there was this point again, whether there could be some kind of compromise reached with the Russians. We've been looking for a win-win scenario in Ukraine for a long time. I don't think it is possible because the Russians don't see it this way. So for President Putin and for the Kremlin, the basic scenario is the full subordination of Ukraine. If they cannot achieve it, probably day by day now, they are coming to the understanding that it's not possible. The second preferred option by the Russians is to destroy the Ukrainian statehood. So there is no win-win scenario, although we can look for that, but it's not existent. It's non-existent in the Russian way of thinking about Ukraine. What the Russians think about Ukraine is, now I will be quoting, let's say, President Putin. So what he thinks is either I control Ukraine in its entirety fully, or there is no Ukraine at all. That's what we saw. That's what we have seen in Mariupol now. What the President Putin is doing, what he's saying, what the Russian military is doing in Ukraine. So either they control Ukraine fully, or there is no Ukraine. So again, what we have to do, and what would be the Ukrainian victory, to deny the Russians' victory in Ukraine.
Steven, your turn, and then Boris.
Thank you, Łukasz, and for the question as to divisions within the European Union. Of course, on trade, decoupling is in progress, and both the European Commission and individual member state governments have issued plans to speed up basically the differentiation of their energy resource intake so as to become independent from Russian gas and oil supplies. I think the next winter will provide us with a thermometer, pun intended, to gauge European resilience in this field, not just in Germany, but especially in the Baltic states and in the other EU member states that are 100% have been 100% dependent on Russian gas. Now, the visions on the future Nazi state of Russia and what conditions of coexistence would have to be formulated then. I think it's already clear now that the EU's Russia strategy, it's not really a strategy, it's rather 5 guiding principles developed by Mogherini in 2016, that approach is clearly at an inflection point. Of the 5 priority areas, the Minsk process is dead. Perhaps the greatest irritant is, of course, the status of Russia's near abroad, the shared/contested neighborhood. And this issue intersects with several unresolved questions, resulting, of course, from the Soviet Union's collapse, which Mr. Putin has been advocating quite adamantly, but which also have, of course, antecedents across centuries of Russian political thought. What are the boundaries of the Russian world? What privileges flow from Russia's claims to great power status, and who gets to write the rules governing the European security system? There it's clear that Putin has no role whatsoever. He's proven himself to be a pathological liar who cannot be trusted. In the other field, selective cooperation in the future, Fortress Russia, Nazi Fortress Russia, seems out of the question as long as Putin sits in the Kremlin, and the EU's ability, therefore, to develop closer relations with civil society will not only prove more difficult in an increasingly totalitarian Russia, but also risk further escalating tension with that totalitarian regime that is trying to ensure its survival. So, continued isolation of the regime is obviously in that scenario the one option, or the main condition. Whether containment is really possible will depend on China to a great extent, and And however, you know, the geopolitical forces that have been unleashed by Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine will settle over the next months, if not years. Whether the EU collective will be able to actually mobilize the support to resistance within Russia is, I think, again, prone to the type of divisions that we've talked about before. So I'm rather skeptical, of course, of such a scenario of coexistence as has been framed in the question. I think it will be, parallel lives that will have to be led in that scenario.
Steven, thank you. I can see your engagement. Just a second. There are several questions from our virtual attendees here. There is the will to ask questions, to engage. I'm very thankful for that. But before we turn to the second round of questions, Boris, please, your turn.
Yes, thank you. I think Ukraine has won to some extent, morally, if not military yet. So it's a total Russian failure. I mean, that's clear. So it's a defeat for Russia on all fronts. So that's about the victory. Of course, the war, the invasion is not over yet, and we'll see how the situation evolves on the ground. But I would say I'm rather optimistic on the outcome. I would avoid the terms of fascist, Nazi about Russia. I think we should not fall in the Russian trap by accusing the other of Nazi and all these kind of things. It's an authoritarian and pretty much totalitarian regime, but let's not misuse historical terms here. I would also be more careful about personalization. I mean, it's a system. So, of course, everybody is focusing on the president, but even if he goes, I mean, I'm not sure we'll get something better instead. So it's really a system that needs to be changed. And as it was said, I mean, that's what we try to achieve with this economic sanctions and what will happen on the ground. But it's not up to us to change the Russian regime. I mean, it's up to the Russians to decide about their future. About trade restrictions, I think we have shown so far huge unity and unprecedented unity. There is also a dynamics with like-minded G7 and so on. So if needed, I think we will come to more sanctions, including in the oil, gas and coal sector. And of course, I cannot prejudge what will be our reaction to the use of chemical weapons or tactical nuclear weapons. It's more a question to military experts, but I think we are ready to go further into sanctions if it happens. That's clear. And we know that there will be a price to pay for citizens, for Europe, but I think we have demonstrated so far that we are ready for that. And I really believe that our unity, solidarity will continue. And finally, there was, I think, a question how to reach Russians. I mean, we are starting using social networks, Russian social networks. As we know, Facebook, Instagram have been declared as extremist. Closed. Internet might be closed one day or switch to a Russian net. But we are working. I cannot say everything now, but we are working on reaching citizens using national Russian social media.
Thank you, Boris. So we continue privileging the in-person presence. So please ask your question, and then we move to the most interesting one from the virtual attendees. The microphone, please. Yeah. Merci.
Thank you very much. Iskra Kirova, I'm with the Open Society Foundations, and I'd like to pick up on this question of the membership application. Indeed, the European leaders in Versailles missed a historic opportunity. This could have been the moment when they jointly declare that Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova have a European membership perspective, and that one day they will become members. It would have cost very little. It would have sent a very important political message. Instead, we have a somewhat tepid declaration and the words of individual leaders after the summit to fill it with more meaning and to give it more ambition. So that opportunity was lost. And now we are at the stage of this bureaucratic process that does give, I think, as Stephen mentioned, member states the opportunity to hide behind it. It could take a very long time. And any kind of modeling from the EU side on this, of course, sends a very, very negative message. Giving a membership perspective would have done very little to actually aggravate the conflict any further. Putin already showed he feels he has a free hand. But giving a negative signal or not giving a conclusive signal, an indication of where the countries are headed and the future relationship with the EU, of course, is very negative and gives further credit to Putin's words that the EU actually is not committed to these three countries and to Ukraine truly. So I guess my question is now with what we have, with the preparation of the questionnaire, the opinion of the Commission, what I know we don't have a representative of the Commission here, but perhaps to Mr. Iarochevitch and to Stephen, what are the options to speed things up? Ukraine has already been assessed within the implementation of the association agreement. There have been several big sectoral assessments. Are there options that the questionnaire could be a sort of a condensed version, something that can be prepared more quickly? And how could also Ukraine be supported in engaging with the EU and with the Commission on this in these times of war? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And two questions, the most interesting from the virtual attendees. First one, complex one, so please concentrate. Does the EU address Russia as first option, the current ruling regime minority? The second, the Russian people influenced by the current ruling regime majority? Or the third option, the Russian people non-supportive to the current ruling regime minority, rejected by the previous two groups? The first question, and the second one regarding the Ukrainian diaspora. We see that the Ukrainian diaspora, refugees, do a lot to support the defense war effort. How to imagine the situation and possibilities of Ukrainians inside Russia? As I know, by the 2010 Russian census, we are talking nearly 2 million Ukrainians living there. Is that a hostage, repression, policing challenge, or is that a resistant disruption, protest potential? An honest question, please. Go ahead.
Honest response.
Yeah. That's honest question. Honest response only. As from the beginning, Olena, please let's begin traditionally from it.
I would probably take this Ukraine diaspora inside of Ukraine, inside of Russia. I saw this question in the screen, so here is my thoughts. We do not know, we do not have knowledge or expertise about what are their feelings or what are their understanding about the war of Russia in Ukraine. Do they see it as a war of Russia, or do they see it as a special operation, or don't they see at all what is happening? Because as you may know, many Ukrainians do have relatives in Russia, and what has happened since the beginning of this stage of war, many of these connections have been cut because of, we understood that this is a clear misunderstanding, complete misunderstanding or alternative picture in their mind. And that's why we do not know whether they themselves continue to consider themselves Ukrainian or not. And if this division in their minds exists, we do not know. So my message would be, and my outcome of this is that again and again, this job, unfortunately, has to be done by Ukrainians and the citizens and the countries of the free world. If any any opposition or any movements inside of Russia will raise, which will help to get rid of this regime. And I do agree that this is a system. We just call it Putin system, but it is a Russian system. So if anything appraise inside of Russia, let's take it as a nice bonus, but not more, but do not count on this. And again, let's mobilize our resources to help Ukraine, our main battlefield here now in Ukraine. And absolutely what we do need is to help Ukraine in military terms, in financial terms, in ammunition, in support and fuels, in everything to win the war, and to help Ukrainians to resist and to mobilize the free world, because we do understand the consequences of the sanctions on citizens and countries of the free world, right? And let's focus on those who really can make impact and who really make victory. This would be my main thoughts about everything connected to the Russians or Ukrainians or Russian population and so on and so on. Thank you.
Your turn.
Okay, those three general points. Point number one is I've been always critical about the European Union, but this time I will be kind of more optimistic. So we've really done a great job, but that's not a time for self-congratulations. I mean, there will be time for that, but not now. We have to support Ukraine pretty fast, because once again there is a small window of opportunity now before the Russians again resumes the military offensive. That's point number one. Point number two about the Russians or Russia in general. I don't think that our priority now is to take care about the Russian population or the Russians. One of the points of pressure, one of the instruments that we have on Putin, on the Russian regime, is the Russian society. And yep, this kind of smart sanctions, that's one of the reasons that we have. I mean, I call it the Russian collective irresponsibility. We created it in Russia because of the smart sanctions. We took care so much of the Russian society that they now subscribe to the Putin's, to the regime's view about Ukraine and about the war against Ukraine. Now is not the time to take care about Russians. We have to impose several costs on the system, on the Russian society. It's up to them, of course, to stand against the system. But that's one of the, that's one of the points or one of the instruments that we have against the Russian regime. The society, the Ukrainians taking up arms. That's the second point, and the third one is, of course, the international reaction to the Russians. And point number three, I would be probably criticized about it. On Ukraine joining the European Union, I think there is a possibility to speed the whole process a bit, but at the end of the day, Ukraine will have to negotiate the terms of its membership in the European Union. And I don't think that the Ukrainian negotiating position now is pretty much strong. So what I'm afraid of is that some EU member states would like to take this opportunity rather to negotiate the terms of Ukrainian membership that would not be so much favorable to the Ukrainians. We saw it with the EU association agreement at some point, that then after a few years, the Ukrainians were rather complaining that the terms of the agreement are not in line with the current situation. So I would be very much in favor of granting Ukraine the candidate status, but then again, with the negotiations, I would not speed it up. Let's focus on situation on the ground. Let's help Ukraine fight the Russian invasion. Then there will be time for the negotiations, because now at the moment it could be actually to the detriment of the Ukrainian interest.
Stephen, please, the floor is yours. Your turn.
Yeah, perfect segue to the question that I wanted to address, of course, on the membership application, and especially the Commission's leeway in facilitating a faster process. I mean, indeed, extraordinary times require extraordinary solutions. And so the Geopolitical Commission should own up to its self-declared status and meet this moment fast. And as been mentioned, based on the ongoing assessments of the implementation of the DCFTA, the association agreement writ large, helped by the Ukrainian government office, which said that it would publish on its website this week already the 2021 implementation report with its track record. The Commission should be able to issue a short political avis in the next month or two, at least in time for the June European Council to decide among member states on granting candidate country status. That indeed would not mean opening accession talks. That would only happen when circumstances allow. And of course, first, the war would have to be won, and the staged accession process building on the DCFTA would have to come with a massive reconstruction package, funding package. So until then, you know, no concrete movement on the enlargement track would be taken. If and when in that moment comes, it would be in a staged process as we've advocated. But now of utmost importance is indeed that political courage that ought to be mustered between member states to grant Ukraine and its citizens, its fighters, basically the concrete prospect of EU membership.
Yes, very briefly. On the membership, I don't think that the candidate status would have changed anything, unfortunately. I still believe that NATO is much more of a red flag, the potential accession of Ukraine and so on, and Georgia to NATO is really a trigger to me, and we have seen it in 2008 in the Russian-Georgian war. I will convey the message to my colleagues, of course, to be creative, innovative, and to see how to speed up the process. But it will take a long time anyway. I mean, of course, to join the EU. And let's not forget Moldova and Georgia, who are also in the same train now. It will take years and years, as we know. But the perspective would be a great step, indeed. On Russia, I mean, the sanctions are targeting the power circles, the inner circle of the power of the regime, oligarchs, state oligarchs, and so on. And that's very clear. But all the citizens are affected. I mean, we are talking about GDP falls this year of 20–30%, and every Russian feels that that situation is bad. I mean, so it's not that we are not touching ordinary citizens, but our main target when it comes to sanctions remains the decision makers and those who bear responsibility for the war. The people who support, I think we try to inform them. The people who support the war in Russia, we try to inform them, and we'll try to do so, and we will work on disinformation and so on. And those who are not supporting, we are helping them too. I mean, we are. It was said that 200,000 Russians have left Russia. The most creative people. There is a real brain drain to Armenia, Georgia, Kyrgyzstan, and so on. Let's not forget about Navalny today, who might get another term of 10 or 13 or 15 years of prison on a fabricated case. And we will issue a statement on that, and we will continue to fight for human rights in Russia. Of course, it's a pity that Russia has been withdrawn or expelled from the Council of Europe, or has left first, because that will limit the possibility for the Russian citizen to go to the European Court of Human Rights. But so we have a differentiated approach, I would say, to respond to this internet question when it comes to the regime, people who support or tacitly support the war, and those who are against it.
We have run out of time. Our debate has reached its end. So thank you so much, dear panelists, first of all, for your contributions, for accepting our invitation. Really, it was very interesting and fascinating discussion, very constructive in many parts. Olena, I will give you the floor also to farewell our guests. Thank you for coming here, and thank you for engagement, for your questions. The same for the virtual attendees. I hope that we continue our cooperation with our Ukrainian partners. Unfortunately, the war is still on, and we will continue taking into account Ukrainian perspective and debating, advocating the end of this dramatic situation in Ukraine. Please follow our events, debates on our Twitter account also. Thank you so much. And Olena, the floor is yours also.
Thank you very much. I would like to express the gratitude on behalf of, first of all, as a Ukrainian citizen, to the citizens of the free world, as I call, for standing with us and to understanding that we are in this together, and this is our common battle, and this we are fighting for our common future. And this, all what we have discussed, this support must be increased. And the main logo, I would say that help Ukraine as if you would help your own country. And it would be correct, and actually, this is what we all need. And thank you again for all the expert community here in Brussels, in Poland, in all countries of the European Union. We stand together. Yes, and one of my main outcomes of today's event is that, yes, we already today need to think about the future of Ukraine, not only to rebuild in a material sense of view, but also in a human and in all kind of view, to rebuild our country and to make it strong, to make it resilient, and to provide its European future. And I'm so grateful, and I'm so happy that we have had a substantial time today allocated to discussion of this. And I would like to thank the Polish Institute of International Affairs colleagues, and Łukasz, especially you, to take a huge burden in organizing the events, given that I have a 3-month child. Thank you very, very much. And I'm glad of this cooperation, and I do know that this is not the last time until we win this war. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'm closing. Thank you. I'm closing the event, and thank you, Press Club, also for your technical and organization support. Bye-bye. Thank you.